most interesting thing about this Sundance camera list aren't the cameras that are on it, it's the ones that aren't. This chart confirms something very important. Documentary filmmaking has already shifted from camera dominance to access dominance. What this list shows is that you now have access to the same level of cameras being used at Sundance right now. You don't need a $50,000 camera to make Sundance caliber work anymore. Let's walk through this list and break down how the shift happened and what it unlocks for you today. What's going on, world? I'm Eric D. Seals, and this video is for documentary filmmakers and DPs who are thinking seriously about camera choices and long-term investments. We're going to look at why this list matters, what the last 5 years shows us, and how to use this information without panic or hype. Before we get into the cameras, we've got to talk about why Sundance even matters. If you don't understand the weight of that festival, this entire chart gets misunderstood really quickly. Sundance has long been one of the most influential spaces for independent filmmaking, especially documentaries. Since the late 1970s, it has been a place where films outside of the studio system could launch careers, secure distribution, and shape culture. So when it comes to the cameras that are in Sundance, when we can analyze the films that have already made it, it really paints a picture of what is happening in the industry. That's why this list matters. It's not a rule book, it's not the only way you can make it in the industry, but it is a signal of what's going on. A lot of people, when they look at this list, they look at it incorrectly. They're looking at the brands. They're looking at their favorite camera. What they need to be looking at is the pattern. When I look at this chart, the brand names matter way less than the behavior behind them. Once you strip the logos away, a very clear pattern starts to show up. So one of the first things that I see in this list is smaller, lighter cameras are appearing much more frequently than the heavier shoulder mount cameras that we're used to seeing on lists like this. Smaller cameras also allow you to be more nimble and to be able to put your camera in places where larger cameras can't fit. This also allows for a faster setup and lower crew dependency. The idea of always having a large documentary crew is fading year by year. You need to be set up faster. You need to be able to operate as if you were a one-man or one-woman band. And so some of these smaller cameras allow you to be able to do that. And so when you have some of these smaller cameras, it gives you the ability to flip it on. It's ready to start recording in less than 5 seconds, and then you can start to tell the story. So now you are stripping away the hurdles that were there before to stop you from being able to tell a great story. And now you're able to lean on the access that you have and the talent of focusing on telling the story instead of letting the camera get in the way of that. And so if you look back in history, larger camera meant quality, where a smaller camera meant less quality. But now that's not the case anymore. Now, when you compare some of these smaller, cheaper, more accessible cameras to some of the cameras that are at the bottom that are known for quality, yes, there is a big difference, but you have to understand what makes a quality camera isn't always the image. I know we think it is, but it is, how you utilize the batteries, how you have access to it, the media that goes into it, how easy is it to fix, how easy is it to mount onto different accessories, how heavy is it? There's so many reasons why we choose a camera, and while the image sensor is a very big part of that, it's not the only reason that we choose it. And so I think a lot of people get sensitive when they're like, oh, how's the Alexa not at the top? Is because that's not the only reason that we're choosing cameras. It's not just for the best image. You have to know that this isn't about image quality dropping. It's about access winning. And that becomes very clear when you look at the cameras that rose to the top. Seeing the FX6 at the top of this list immediately told me something had shifted, not because it's the perfect camera, but because of what it represents. With the FX6 on top, one of the first things you have to realize is that the FX6 is not the flagship Sony camera. And so when we think of flagship, we think their top highest quality camera that they own. We all know that that's the Venice for digital filmmaking. The FX6 is not even the second, and technically not even the third. You have the Sony Venice 1 and 2. You now have the Burano, the FX9, which is no longer being sold, but was above it at a certain time. And then you have the FX6. Then it's followed by the FX3, the FX2, A7S III is thrown in there as well. But if you're looking just at the cinema line, the FX6 is down here. So when we're looking at documentary filmmaking, we're usually doing 10, 12, maybe even 14-hour days on a regular basis. So having a camera that's designed for long documentary days becomes a very high priority when we're selecting a camera. The next thing to look at is a lot of people aren't having documentary crews that have 6, 7, 8 people in it anymore. Sometimes it's just a producer director, a DP, and an audio person. Sometimes it's not even an AC, different positions that will support that crew as well. So sometimes you're looking at 2 and 3 person crews. And because of that, you don't have the ability to have a whole bunch of equipment because it takes a lot of time and effort to move that equipment to get it set up. You see a lot of documentary filmmaking where everything that they need is in their backpack, is because you need to be able to be ready for a full day of shooting with very little support. And that's why that FX6 really sits very nicely at the top of this list. Sometimes the access when documentary filmmaking is going to be more important than the image quality. The FX6 isn't winning because it's the best camera on paper. It's winning because how it fits in the documentaries that are actually being made. Which then raises the question, well, where did the flagship cameras go? It's not that the big cameras disappeared. They didn't go anywhere. They're still on the list. It's that they stopped being the automatic choice for every documentary that's being made. Look at filmmaking today. Look at documentaries today. The large crews and large cameras aren't always being used because it makes the documentary price go up. The larger crews are usually used for select projects. They're going to be used for sometimes mainly sit-down interviews, or they're going to be used when you have a full supportive crew to make sure that everything is working for that project on a regular basis. If I had the choice to use the Sony Venice or the Arri Alexa, or I'm trying to think of some other cameras, it wouldn't always be my first choice depending on what the budget is. And even if I had the budget, I might want to take out some of that money and put it into other areas. And that other area might be being able to afford more filming days because our package and our crew requirements aren't as high. That to me is more important as a documentary filmmaker, having access to my subject on a longer term basis than having a quality difference between 2 cameras that's maybe 5 to 10%. Because honestly, when I give it to a colorist, when people get sucked into the story, they're not gonna think, oh, this is a great documentary, but that should have been filmed on an Arri Alexa. Nobody's gonna say that. They're gonna say, yo, this is a great moment. Because when we watch documentaries, we're thinking about the moments. This shift didn't happen overnight. When you actually look back over the last 5 years, you can see the shift happening just in slow motion. Whenever we look at documentary filmmaking, it's rarely the newest camera or the most expensive camera. You'll see some cameras on this list that have been out for a very long time. It's because they get the job done and people are used to them. When a producer hires you, they might have some suggestions on the cameras that they're gonna use. And most producers, directors are not scouring YouTube and on B&H on a regular basis, looking at the latest cameras that came out. They're thinking about the cameras that they've utilized on projects from the last 10 years. So that means that a lot of the choices that people have are not the latest and greatest cameras that came out. It's the ones that they're familiar with. There's not many documentaries that are shot exclusively with just one camera. And so that means that you need to have flexibility with the type of cameras that you use, but it also means that if you set the bar so high with a camera that you can only afford a couple of days of filming, there's a good chance that you're not gonna be able to use that for the rest of the project. But if you get a mid-tier camera that you can either purchase yourself or you can utilize because everybody in your community has one, that will fit better for a project that goes for years. And that's something that you need to consider when you're thinking about camera choices and why some of the other cameras on this list are changing. All right, so when I look at some of these cameras, I mean, the first surprise that I see is seeing the Sony FX6 at the top of the list. It's not a perfect camera. It has a great image. It does a lot of things fantastic. I mean, honestly, if you look at camera 1 and 2, the C70 and the FX6, that really tells you everything that you need to know. It's about mid-tier cameras that provide a high quality image that don't get in the way of filmmaking with all the hassle that's needed to get it going. And so those 2 cameras being on the top is a new thing for me. Now looking at the Alexa Mini, that's a camera that I'm expecting to see up top. I think also because people are used to using that camera. If you're gonna get an Alexa Mini, you know what you're getting into when you choose that camera. Going down the list, and they kind of just bundled them all together. I think the A7S III would probably be in here, but the A7 IV, the A7 V, which just recently came out, is probably not on there. There's so many A7 cameras that can fit within this model. It's kind of a cheat code to be able to put that on there because it's not just one, followed up by that, the Sony FX3, which is a camera that I expect to be up there. It's a camera that you can, just like the FX6, put it in even tighter places. It's even easier to access, and it has one of the greatest images. The C300 Mark II is a huge surprise. This shows you that it's about people being familiar with the camera, because people need to understand the C300 Mark II is not even the latest C300. There's a Mark III. And then on top of that, you have the C500 Mark II, you have the C400 that came out, and people are still going to the C300 Mark II because it is a camera workhorse. If we look at the last 20 years, I think the C300 Mark II and the FS7 are still the documentary kings of capturing content. Going down the list to seeing the Sony Venice, that's no surprise. The iPhone is no surprise to me. That's, with people being able to tell stories, there's no better camera than the one that's in your pocket. And so with the iPhone being one of the most popular phones in the game, the image that comes from them are good enough to tell stories. Now we look at the bottom of the list after this, we're looking at the Sony FX9, which is a camera that I'm a big fan of. That's no surprise that it's at the bottom of the list. I think if we looked at what happens next year, I wouldn't be surprised if this is not on the list at all. I think you'll see the C80 going higher in the next coming years, especially seeing that the C70 is number 2. As far as capabilities and image quality, we know the C80 has some things that the 70 doesn't have, so expect that to go up. And then the Alexa Mini LF, which is still a very expensive camera. No longer do I think you're gonna see $50,000 cameras at the top of this list, but I do think you will see them on the list. I think the biggest surprise of this list is the fact that we do not see the Sony Burano. The Sony Burano, the C500 Mark II, the C400. Now maybe because the C400 is a newer camera and the Burano is slightly new as well, but the fact that I don't see a C500 Mark II is a big surprise to me on this. And you also do not see any red cameras, which always would make the list if you look at the previous years. But that tells you that people want simplicity. And one of the downgrades of how people viewed the red cameras is that they're difficult to use. Even though they're not really difficult to use at all. I think there's no issues at all. But when they first came out, you got 5 to 8 years where people would have problems with them on set and they had a negative rap. And so that means that when people are going to build their camera package 10 years down the road, a producer might say no red cameras. All right, now looking at the 2025 list, you see that the A7 is bundled all their cameras together when they did this list, which I don't think is fully fair. You see a big push from the FX9 and FX6, but then if you look at what's below the FX6, you have the FX3. And the C70, which I think is room for most improvement, it made a big jump. It jumped all of these cameras just within 1 year. And so that shows you that we're really starting to see the shift happen before our eyes. But then if you look at the bottom of the list, you see your Sony Venice, which to me, this is where these cameras are gonna live. The very expensive cameras that people love the image to, but everybody can't afford. So you see your Sony Venice, you see the Burano in here, and you don't see the Burano on the 2026 list. You see the C300 Mark II still on here. You see a film camera from Ari, and then you have a red camera Komodo. So there's several cameras on this list right here that didn't make it to the next year. And it's not because of their age, because the Burano is newer than some of the cameras that we see on the list after this. But it really tells you that the shift is happening in this time frame. One of the biggest falls in this list is you see the FX9 go from the top of the list to the bottom of the list. Then you see the C70 kind of the mid tier and then jump to the top. And then some cameras like the C500 Mark II and the Burano don't even make it to the next list. So that's really telling when you start to look at how these cameras are changing when we're telling stories. All right, now looking at 2024, you see the C300 Mark II leading the list. You see the FX9 on top as well. Sony is dominating this, the stories that are being told at Sundance at this time. But one thing to notice in here is you got the FX6, which is staying very consistent at the top. The FS7 and the FX9 are dominating at this point because a lot of people are familiar with these cameras, along with the C500 Mark II, which is at the top of the list, but the next 2 years you see it doesn't even make the list. And the C300 Mark II at the top of this list, and we still see it on the 2026 list. So that starts to tell you that it's not just about the quality and the image, because a lot of cameras on this list look better than the C300 Mark II, but people are familiar with it. They know that they can take it in the middle of the jungle and it's going to work. You also notice that you don't see a lot of Blackmagic cameras on here. And we all know that Blackmagic has one of the best images in the game, but also people aren't familiar with it as much. It's not requested as much. The Amira is on this list, which is a camera that has been very popular when we're looking at documentaries, but you notice that the Amira is not on the list for the later years and the most recent years that we just looked at. Part of that is because that thing is heavy. It's a beautiful image. It's before its time when it came out, I think in 2016, but that thing is 10 bricks on your shoulder. Even if you have an easy rig, that thing is not easy to hold all day. The startup time is a little bit slower. Some of the technology is a little bit dated when it comes to the Amira, but when it comes to image quality, still one of the best in the game. All right, so now when we jump and look to 2023, you see that C300. I'm assuming it's the Mark II because it's not listed. And you see the C500 on there as well, and the FX9 dominating at the top of the list. You see the FX6 at the very bottom of the list, which shows you that we are still prioritizing the larger tier cameras that they have. The cameras that are between 10 and 15K are the ones that are dominating. But as we start to get to 2026, you'll see that the cameras that are dominating are more so in that $7,000 to $11,000 range. One thing you notice when you look at all of these lists, there's some cameras that continue to show up. The RE cameras, for example, they show up on a regular basis. And while it's not the leader like it was previous years that we looked at, they're going to continue to show up because there's some documentaries, there's some stories where it's important that that image sensor, that camera is on the project. And so it doesn't mean that these cameras no longer have value. It's just that they're really in a certain segment of the population when it comes to documentary storytelling, and it no longer dominates like it used to in the past. Just keep in mind that cameras lower on this list are still highly capable and still have some of the best image quality out there. I think we need to stop looking at it like that's the right camera and that's the wrong camera. These are different tools that you're utilizing to tell your story. And just because it's being used less for documentaries does not mean that it's still not holding its weight or doing the job. When Sundance or a major festival accepts your film, they're not using your camera as a critique. They want to know if it looks good. And it could be looking good from a camera that's from 20 years ago. They don't care. They're not even probably asking you. This is something that's selective or volunteer basis as far as information, but nobody cares what camera that you use. So if you have a camera that you are utilizing, that camera can work to get into major festivals. The thing that you need to think about is, do you have the access? This chart is a guide. It's not a rule book. Image quality is no longer the barrier. Access, patience, and trust are. If you want more documentary first analysis, gear, storytelling, please let me know in the comments below. My name is Eric D. Seals. Keep telling stories that matter.